To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear which part of the world you're joining us from. Let us know now. Let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. The morning sun cast long shadows across the construction site as Trevor Hoffman adjusted his hard hat and surveyed the skeletal frame of what would become the city's newest shopping complex. At 42, he had built his contracting business from nothing, transforming from a kid who grew up in foster care into one of the most respected builders in the region. His calloused hands told the story of every brick laid, every beam raised. Another early morning, boss called out Miguel, his foreman and one of the few people Trevor trusted completely. Miguel had been with him since the beginning, when Trevor was still working 16-hour days to prove himself worthy of the contracts that established firms wouldn't even bid on. Foundation work doesn't wait for anyone, Trevor replied, checking his watch. 6 a.m. sharp, same as every day for the past 15 years. Discipline had been his salvation, the thing that separated him from the chaos of his childhood. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "Don't forget about the camping trip this weekend. My family is really excited to see you. Love you, Bree." Trevor's jaw tightened slightly. Bree's family had never quite accepted him, despite 12 years of marriage and his obvious success. Her older brother, Randall, a trust fund kid who'd never worked a real day in his life, had a particular talent for making Trevor feel like an outsider. But Bree had insisted, and Trevor had learned that keeping his wife happy meant enduring her family's thinly veiled condescension. Bree Martinez had been the college psychology professor who'd volunteered to tutor adults working toward their GEDs. Trevor had been 28 then, finally ready to finish his education while building his business. She'd been patient with his struggles, encouraging when he felt stupid, and eventually something more than a tutor. She'd seen potential in the rough-edged contractor that others had missed. Or so he'd thought. The irony wasn't lost on him now. A psychology professor who understood human behavior better than anyone, yet he'd never seen what was coming. "Miguel, I need you to handle the inspection Monday morning," Trevor said, pocketing his phone. "I'll be back Tuesday. Everything all right, boss?" "You seem tense." Trevor managed a slight smile. "Just family stuff. You know how it is." But Miguel didn't know. Miguel had a loving family who welcomed everyone with open arms and genuine warmth. Trevor had learned to be suspicious of families like that, having never experienced one himself, until Bree. The construction site hummed with activity as Trevor's crew arrived. These men respected him because he'd earned it, working alongside them, never asking them to do something he wouldn't do himself. Unlike Bree's family, they didn't care about his past or his lack of a college degree. They cared that he paid fair wages, that he had their backs, and that he delivered quality work on time. As Trevor watched his men begin their day, he reflected on how different his life had become. The scared kid bouncing between foster homes had been replaced by a man who commanded respect through strength and reliability. He'd built everything from nothing, and he'd be damned if anyone would take it away from him. His phone rang. "Hey, honey, just wanted to make sure you're still planning to leave Friday afternoon," Bree called. Randall said they found this amazing spot by the river, really secluded and beautiful. "I'll be there," Trevor replied, though something in her tone seemed off. After 12 years of marriage, he could usually read every inflection in her voice. "Great. I'm so excited for us to have this time together as a family." Family. The word that had once filled him with warmth now carried an edge he couldn't quite identify. Trevor had spent his entire adult life trying to build the family he'd never had as a child. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so bitter. After ending the call, Trevor stood in silence, watching his crew work. These men, this business, this life, he'd built it. It was all real, all earned through sweat and determination. Unlike the fake smiles and hollow pleasantries that awaited him at the family camping trip, he had no idea that by Sunday night, everything he believed about his life would be shattered, and the man who'd clawed his way up from nothing would discover just how far he was willing to fall to get his revenge. Chapter 2. The Perfect Wife. Dr. Brianna Martinez Hoffman sat in her office at the university, ostensibly grading papers, but actually staring out the window at the campus quad. Students moved between classes with the carefree energy of youth, unaware of how complicated life would eventually become. She envied them. Her office walls displayed her credentials: PhD in clinical psychology, various awards for her research on behavioral patterns and relationships, framed photos with colleagues at conferences. To anyone who looked, she was the picture of academic success. What they couldn't see was the growing restlessness that had been eating at her for the past 2 years. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in. Dr. Martinez, I have the research materials you requested." The voice belonged to Derek Voss, her graduate assistant. At 28, he was brilliant, ambitious, and everything Trevor wasn't: sophisticated, cultured, from the right kind of family. "Thank you, Derek. And please, call me Bree when we're alone." She smiled in the way that had been coming more naturally lately, the way she never smiled at Trevor anymore. Derek closed the door behind him and moved closer to her desk. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about your research into relationship dissolution patterns." "Oh." Bree leaned back in her chair, studying him. Derek had been working with her for 8 months now, and their conversations had gradually shifted from purely academic to deeply personal. The subject you've been using as a case study: the blue-collar husband who married above his social class. I think there might be more angles to explore. Bree's heart raced. They both knew they weren't really talking about research anymore. What kind of angles? Derek sat on the edge of her desk, close enough that she could smell his cologne. The psychological impact on both parties when fundamental incompatibilities become impossible to ignore. When someone realizes they've outgrown their circumstances. The words hung in the air between them. For months, their relationship had been dancing around this edge, using academic language to discuss what they both wanted but hadn't dared voice directly. "Derek," she began, but he placed a finger gently against her lips. "I know you feel it too, Bree. The connection we have, the way you light up when we're together, that's not something you can fake or force." She closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the attraction she'd been fighting. Trevor had been a good husband in many ways, faithful, hardworking, providing for her. But he could never understand the world she inhabited, could never engage with her intellectually the way Derek did. Their conversations at home had devolved into logistics about schedules and bills, while her discussions with Derek sparked something she'd forgotten she was missing. "This camping trip this weekend," she said softly. "It might be the perfect opportunity to evaluate some things." Derek raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Bree opened her laptop and pulled up a map. "My brother, Randall, found this location by the Clearwater River. Very remote, very isolated. My family will be there, including Randall and his twin sons and Trevor. Trevor will be there too, of course." She paused, meeting Derek's eyes. "But accidents happen in remote places. The river is particularly dangerous this time of year. The spring runoff makes the current incredibly strong." Derek leaned closer, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That's quite a research opportunity. Randall has never liked Trevor. Neither have his sons. They're 22 now, both athletes, both resentful that their Uncle Trevor isn't what they consider family material. If something were to happen, there would be witnesses to verify that it was an accident," Derek finished. Bree nodded. "And then, after an appropriate mourning period, I'd be free to pursue new research directions." They sat in silence for a moment, both understanding that they'd crossed a line from fantasy into planning. The psychology professor in Bree recognized the rationalization happening in her mind. She was reframing murder as liberation, betrayal as personal growth. "What about the insurance?" Derek asked quietly. $2 million policy. Plus, Trevor's business is worth almost another $1 million. I'd be comfortable, Derek. We'd be comfortable. The graduate assistant, who'd grown up in Manhattan's Upper East Side, felt his pulse quicken. He'd always been attracted to Bree's intelligence and beauty, but the thought of combining that with financial security made the attraction irresistible. "When would this hypothetical accident occur?" he asked. "Saturday evening, probably. Randall mentioned wanting to show Trevor the best fishing spots along the riverbank. The boys could help. They've been looking forward to spending time with their uncle. The last word dripped with sarcasm. Derek reached across and took her hand. And after, I need someone to help me through the grieving process. Someone who understands me, who can offer the kind of support a widow needs. They both knew they were talking about murder now, not research or hypothetical scenarios. But the words they chose made it feel academic, intellectual, the kind of problem-solving they both excelled at. I should go, Derek said, though he made no move to leave. But, Bree, I think your research is going to yield very interesting results. After he left, Bree sat alone with her thoughts. She pulled out her phone and sent Trevor a loving text about the camping trip, complete with a heart emoji. The ease with which she could switch between personas, devoted wife and calculating planner, should have disturbed her. Instead, it made her feel powerful. She began making a mental list of all the ways she'd demonstrate grief when the time came. After all, she was an expert in human behavior. Playing the devastated widow would be her greatest performance yet. Chapter 3. The Brothers' Bond. Randall Martinez had always lived in the shadow of expectations he could never quite meet. At 45, he'd spent most of his life coasting on his family's reputation and money, watching others, like his despised brother-in-law, achieve through effort what he'd been handed and squandered. The Martinez family had built their wealth through 3 generations of smart real estate investments, but Randall had proven remarkably adept at eroding that foundation. Bad business decisions, expensive divorces, and a gambling problem had left him financially dependent on the family trust at an age when he should have been building his own legacy. "Dad, you sure about this plan?" asked Connor, his older twin by 12 minutes. At 22, Connor had inherited his father's resentment, but coupled it with a young man's appetite for action. His brother, Garrett, was quieter but equally committed to the family's unspoken mission. They sat in Randall's den, a room filled with trophies from a high school football career that remained the highlight of his life. Empty beer bottles cluttered the coffee table, and the afternoon light, filtering through expensive curtains, illuminated 3 men united by shared failure and mutual resentment. "I'm absolutely sure," Randall replied, taking another long drink. "Trevor Hoffman has been a cancer in this family for 12 years. My sister deserves better. But Uncle Trevor's always been decent to us," Garrett offered hesitantly. Unlike his brother, Garrett occasionally felt uncomfortable with their family's treatment of Trevor. "Decent?" Randall's voice rose. "The man's a glorified construction worker who somehow convinced your brilliant aunt to marry down. He doesn't belong in our family, and frankly, I'm tired of pretending otherwise." Connor leaned forward, eager. "So, what exactly are we doing Saturday?" Randall pulled out a detailed topographical map of the Clearwater River area. Red X's marked specific locations along the waterway. "I've been scouting this area for weeks. The river's running high and fast from the spring melt. Water temperature's about 45 degrees, currents moving at nearly 8 miles per hour through this section." He pointed to a bend in the river where the water narrowed between rocky outcroppings. "This is where we'll be fishing. It's isolated. No other campers or hikers come through here. The nearest road access is 3 miles downstream." And then, Connor asked, though they all knew the answer, "Then Trevor has an unfortunate accident. Maybe he slips on the wet rocks while trying to help with something. Maybe he gets too close to the edge. These things happen in remote areas. That's why they're dangerous." Garrett shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, we're talking about protecting this family." Randall cut him off. "Your aunt called me yesterday, crying about how trapped she feels, how she made a mistake marrying someone so far beneath her station. She deserves a chance at happiness with someone appropriate." This was a lie, of course. Bree had said no such thing to Randall, but he convinced himself that removing Trevor would be an act of family loyalty, not murder. In his mind, he was the hero of this story. "What about the body?" Connor asked with the casual detachment of someone who'd played too many violent video games. "The Clearwater feeds into the Columbia River system. If someone goes under in that current wearing heavy camping gear, they might not surface for days. Could end up miles downstream, if at all." Randall had spent considerable time researching drowning statistics and recovery rates. His plan wasn't the product of sudden anger, but careful, methodical planning that had taken weeks to develop. Besides, he continued, we'll all be witnesses that it was an accident. Family witnesses. Who's going to question our account? The twins exchanged glances. Connor was clearly excited by the prospect of action, of finally proving himself to his father. Garrett remained hesitant, but was too weak to oppose his father and brother. What about afterward? Garrett asked. Afterward, we're grieving family members who did everything we could to save poor Trevor. We'll be the ones comforting Bree through her loss, helping her rebuild her life. Randall's phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Everything arranged for Saturday evening. Subject will be in optimal position. The message was deliberately vague, but Randall understood. Derek had been reporting Trevor's schedule and habits for weeks, ensuring that their plan would unfold smoothly. Having an inside source had made the entire operation feel more professional, more certain of success. Who's that? Connor asked. Just confirming some details, Randall replied, pocketing the phone. Gentlemen, by Sunday morning our family will finally be free of Trevor Hoffman, and Bree will be free to find someone worthy of her. What none of them realized was that Trevor Hoffman hadn't survived his brutal childhood and built a successful business by being naive or unprepared. The man they planned to kill had learned long ago to watch for signs of betrayal, and he'd been noticing changes in his wife's behavior for weeks. More importantly, they had no idea that Trevor had installed tracking software on Bree's phone months earlier after noticing her secretive behavior. He'd been reading every text, listening to every call, and had spent the past 2 weeks planning his own response to their perfect plan. The hunters were about to discover they'd chosen the wrong prey. Chapter 4. The trap is set. Trevor stood at the edge of the Clearwater River, watching the dark water rush past with deceptive power. The camping area Randall had chosen was indeed isolated, exactly as it had been described in the text messages Trevor had been intercepting from his wife's phone for the past month. Beautiful spot, isn't it? Randall appeared beside him, carrying 2 beers. His smile was warm and friendly, the same expression he'd worn while texting Derek about optimal positioning and accident scenarios. Very nice, Trevor replied, accepting the beer. Your boys seem excited about the fishing tomorrow. They've been looking forward to spending time with their uncle. The word carried just enough emphasis to remind Trevor that he would always be an outsider, always the brother-in-law who'd married above his station. Behind them, the camping area buzzed with activity. Bree was organizing the food supplies with theatrical enthusiasm, playing the role of devoted wife for what she believed would be the last time. Connor and Garrett were setting up tents, their nervous energy barely contained. Derek had arrived an hour ago, introduced as a family friend who joined them at the last minute. Trevor had spent 12 years learning to read these people, understanding their tells and motivations. What they didn't know was that his foster care childhood had taught him survival skills they couldn't imagine. He'd learned to sleep with one eye open, to trust no one completely, and to always have an escape plan. Trevor, Bree called out, her voice carrying across the campsite with artificial cheer. Come help me with dinner. He walked over to where she was arranging supplies on the picnic table. Up close, he could see the tension around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she organized items that didn't need organizing. You okay, honey? He asked quietly. Of course. Just excited to have everyone together. She stood on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek, a gesture that would look loving to observers, but felt cold against his skin. Bree, I've been thinking about us lately, Trevor said, watching her reaction carefully. Her whole body went rigid. What do you mean? I mean, our marriage. Our future together. I know I'm not the most sophisticated guy, and I know your family thinks you could do better. Trevor, that's not. It's okay, he interrupted gently. I've always known I wasn't good enough for someone like you. Maybe it's time we both admitted that. For a moment, genuine emotion flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps even guilt. But it was quickly replaced by relief. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now. Just think about it, okay? Think about what would make you happiest. Behind her, Derek was watching their conversation intently. Trevor caught his eye and nodded politely, as if he were acknowledging a family friend rather than his wife's lover and co-conspirator. As evening approached, the group gathered around the campfire. Randall had positioned Trevor with his back to the river, while Connor and Garrett flanked him on either side. Derek sat close to Bree, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that would have been obvious to anyone who bothered to look. "You know what, Trevor?" Randall said, his voice carrying over the crackling flames. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For not appreciating you more over the years. You've been good to my sister, and I haven't always acknowledged that." The words were carefully chosen, designed to sound good later when repeated to investigators. Trevor nodded graciously, playing his expected role. "I appreciate that, Randall. Family is important to me. It always has been." "Well, tomorrow we'll make sure you get the full family experience," Connor added, with barely concealed excitement. "Dad found some amazing fishing spots along the river." "Dangerous spots, though," Garrett added nervously. "The water's really high and fast this year." "Don't worry," Randall laughed. "We'll keep everyone safe. Can't have any accidents, right?" The word accidents hung in the air like a challenge. Trevor met Randall's eyes across the fire and smiled. "No, we certainly can't have any accidents." As the evening wore on, Trevor excused himself to check their tent. Inside, he made a quick call on a satellite phone he'd brought specifically for this trip. "Miguel, it's me. Everything's in position for tomorrow. You sure about this, boss? This is some serious stuff." "I'm sure. These people think they're hunting a sheep, Miguel. They have no idea what they're actually dealing with." "The GPS tracker is working?" Trevor touched the small device clipped inside his belt. "Perfectly. You'll know exactly where I am at all times. And if something goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, you know what to do." After ending the call, Trevor sat in the darkness, listening to the sound of the river and the muted voices from around the campfire. Tomorrow, Bree and her accomplices would make their move, confident in their plan and their ability to execute it flawlessly. They had no way of knowing that Trevor had been planning his response for weeks, or that the man they intended to kill was already several steps ahead of them. Most importantly, they didn't understand that the difference between them and Trevor wasn't just social class or education. It was that Trevor had spent his entire life fighting to survive, while they'd spent theirs assuming they deserved to win. By tomorrow night, they would learn the difference between those two worldviews, and the lesson would be permanent. Chapter 5. The River's Edge. The morning air was crisp as Randall led the group along the narrow trail toward his chosen fishing spot. Trevor walked slightly ahead, apparently relaxed and trusting, while Connor and Garrett followed behind, their excitement barely contained. Bree had stayed at camp with Derek, claiming a headache, but actually positioning herself to establish an alibi. Just around this bend, Randall called out cheerfully, "The fishing is incredible through here." They emerged onto a rocky outcropping where the river narrowed and picked up speed. The water was dark and fast, carrying debris from the spring runoff. The sound was louder here, making conversation difficult, perfect for masking any sounds of struggle. "Wow, this is something," Trevor said, moving toward the edge to get a better look. His positioning was exactly what they'd hoped for, back to the group, focused on the water below. Randall caught his son's eyes and nodded slightly. This was it. "Uncle Trevor," Connor called out. "Come look at this fishing setup Dad brought." As Trevor turned, both twins moved quickly. Connor grabbed his left arm while Garrett, despite his reservations, seized his right. Their father had drilled them on this moment for days. Quick, coordinated action that would send Trevor into the water without giving him time to resist. "What the hell?" Trevor started, but Randall was already moving, adding his weight to push his brother-in-law toward the edge. For a moment, it looked like their plan would work perfectly. Trevor struggled against their grip, his feet scrambling for purchase on the wet rocks. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of panicking, Trevor seemed to relax. "Make sure he drowns," Bree's voice carried from upstream, where she'd positioned herself to watch from a distance. Her words were meant to ensure the twins followed through completely, but they would also serve as evidence of her involvement if anyone had been listening. The three men forced Trevor over the edge, watching as he hit the fast-moving water with a splash that was immediately swallowed by the river's roar. For several seconds, they could see him struggling against the current, his head appearing and disappearing as he was swept downstream. Then he went under and didn't come back up. Jesus, Garrett whispered, the reality of what they'd done hitting him suddenly. Stay calm, Randall ordered, though his own hands were shaking. Remember, he slipped while we were fishing. We tried to save him, but the current was too strong. They watched the water for another 10 minutes, but there was no sign of Trevor. The river had claimed him, exactly as they planned. We should call for help, Connor said, though he was clearly pleased with how smoothly everything had gone. Not yet, Randall replied. We need to get back to camp first. Make sure our story is straight. What none of them saw was Trevor's head breaking the surface 200 yards downstream, around a bend that hid him from their view. He'd used the river's current and his knowledge of water survival skills, learned during a brief stint with a rescue squad in his 20s, to fake his drowning while actually swimming to safety. The GPS tracker Miguel was monitoring showed his location clearly, and emergency supplies were already positioned at predetermined points along the riverbank. Trevor hauled himself onto a hidden sandbar and immediately activated a waterproof emergency beacon. Miles away, Miguel received the signal and began implementing the second phase of their plan. Back at the campsite, Bree was pacing nervously when Randall and the twins returned. Derek sat nearby, maintaining the pretense of being a concerned family friend. Well, Bree asked quietly. It's done, Randall replied. The river took him. It'll be hours before anyone could possibly find. He was interrupted by the sound of approaching sirens. Multiple vehicles were coming up the access road at high speed. What the hell? Connor said, spinning toward the sound. Within minutes, their campsite was surrounded by sheriff's deputies, state police, and search and rescue teams. The lead detective, a weathered woman named Captain Morrison, approached their group with a grim expression. I'm looking for Randall Martinez and his family, she announced. That's us, Randall replied, trying to sound confused rather than terrified. Is there a problem? We received an emergency beacon signal from this area about an hour ago. Someone requesting immediate rescue assistance from the Clearwater River. Bree's face went white. Emergency beacon? But Trevor doesn't have. She caught herself, but not quickly enough. Ma'am, who is Trevor? Captain Morrison asked, pulling out a notepad. My husband. He went fishing with my brother this morning. And where is your husband now? The silence stretched uncomfortably as the group realized their story was falling apart before they'd even had a chance to tell it. There was an accident, Randall finally said. Trevor slipped on the rocks by the river. We tried to help him, but the current. What time did this accident occur? About an hour ago. Maybe less. Captain Morrison exchanged glances with her team. That's interesting because the emergency beacon we received was activated exactly 63 minutes ago from a location approximately 2 miles downstream for where you say your brother-in-law fell in. The implications of this information hit them like a physical blow. If Trevor had activated an emergency beacon downstream, that meant he was alive. Worse, it meant he'd planned for this exact situation. I don't understand, Bree said. Neither do I, ma'am, but I think we're about to get some answers. My search and rescue team just made contact with a man matching your husband's description. He's alive, he's safe, and he's asking to speak with law enforcement about an attempted murder. As if summoned by her words, Trevor appeared at the edge of the campsite, escorted by 2 rescue workers and looking very much alive. His clothes were wet and he appeared exhausted, but his eyes held a clarity that none of them had ever seen before. Hello, family, he said quietly. I think we need to talk. Chapter 6, Recordings and Revelations. The sheriff's station conference room felt smaller with each passing minute. Trevor sat across from Captain Morrison, a recording device between them, while through the one-way glass he could see his wife, her brother, and the twins being processed in separate holding areas. Derek had been picked up at the university an hour earlier. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Mr. Hoffman, Captain Morrison said, reviewing her notes. You're telling me that you've been aware of this murder plot for over a month? Trevor nodded. I started getting suspicious when my wife's behavior changed. She was being secretive with her phone, staying late at work more often, and her whole attitude toward me shifted. When you've grown up the way I did, you learn to recognize when someone's planning to hurt you. So you installed monitoring software on her phone? I know how that sounds, but yes. What I found was extensive. Trevor pulled out a folder containing printed screenshots. Text messages between my wife and her graduate assistant, Derek Voss, discussing how to remove obstacles to their relationship. Communications with her brother about finding an isolated location. Detailed discussions about insurance policies and inheritance procedures. Captain Morrison examined the documents. The evidence was damning. A clear conspiracy to commit murder with multiple participants and detailed planning. Why didn't you come to us sooner? Trevor's expression hardened. Because I wanted to know exactly who was involved and how far they were willing to go. These people have spent 12 years treating me like garbage, but I never thought they'd actually try to kill me. I needed to be absolutely certain. And you were prepared for what happened today. I've been planning my response for 3 weeks. I knew the approximate location Randall had chosen because I read his text messages. I scouted the area myself, identified escape routes, and positioned emergency supplies. My foreman, Miguel, was monitoring my GPS location and coordinating with rescue services. That's incredibly risky, Mr. Hoffman. You could have been killed. Maybe. But if I'd gone to the police with just text messages and suspicions, what would have happened? They'd have denied everything, claimed it was all hypothetical discussions or jokes. This way, I have them dead to rights for attempted murder. Through the glass, Trevor could see Bree sitting in an interrogation room, her composed psychology professor facade cracking as the reality of her situation became clear. Derek was in another room, looking young and terrified as he faced the consequences of his academic theories becoming criminal action. There's something else, Trevor continued, pulling out a small recording device. I've been wearing a wire for the past week, including today. I have Bree's voice clearly saying, "Make sure he drowns," while her brother and nephews were throwing me into the river. Captain Morrison's eyebrows rose. You recorded your own attempted murder? Every word, including the planning conversations I captured at the campsite last night. The detective plugged the device into her computer and played back the recordings. Bree's voice came through clearly. The insurance policy is $2 million, plus Trevor's business is worth almost another $1 million. I'd be comfortable, Derek. We'd be comfortable. Then Randall's voice. Trevor has an unfortunate accident. Maybe he slips on the wet rocks. These things happen in remote areas. And finally, the chilling moment at the river. Make sure he drowns. This is comprehensive evidence of premeditated murder conspiracy, Captain Morrison said, with multiple participants and clear intent. There's more, Trevor said grimly. I want to show you something else. He pulled out his laptop and opened a series of financial documents. While I was investigating their plot, I did some digging into Derek Voss's background. He's not just some innocent graduate student who fell in love with my wife. The screen showed bank records, credit reports, and legal documents. Derek has been running a sophisticated identity theft scheme for over 2 years. He's been using his position at the university to access student financial information, then creating false identities to take out loans and credit cards. He's stolen over $300,000 so far. Captain Morrison leaned forward, studying the evidence. How did you obtain these financial records? Let's just say I have friends in the construction industry who know people in various professional services. When you build half the buildings in a city, you develop a network. The detective nodded, understanding that Trevor's investigation had been more thorough than most police work. So Derek wasn't just after your wife. He was after financial security to cover his existing crimes. Exactly. And I think when you dig deeper, you'll find that Randall's financial situation is even worse than he's been letting on. Gambling debts, failed investments, potential bankruptcy. My death would have been convenient for all of them in different ways. Through the glass, they could see a commotion in one of the holding areas. Connor was arguing with a deputy, his composure finally breaking as the reality of attempted murder charges set in. What happens now? Trevor asked. Now we process them on conspiracy to commit murder attempted murder, and we'll add the financial crimes charges for Derek Voss. Based on the evidence you've provided, we're looking at potential life sentences for the main conspirators. Trevor sat back in his chair, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. For months, he'd known his marriage was over, but he'd never imagined it would end with his wife literally trying to kill him. Mr. Hoffman, I have to ask, why go through with this? Why not just divorce her and move on? Trevor's eyes hardened with a coldness that made the experienced detective uncomfortable. Because these people thought they could murder me and get away with it. They thought I was weak, stupid, someone they could dispose of without consequences. I wanted them to know exactly who they were dealing with. And now they do. Now they do. And they'll have the rest of their lives in prison to think about their mistake. As if to emphasize his point, Bree's voice could be heard through the glass, screaming at her interrogator. You don't understand. He was holding me back. I deserved better than some construction worker. Trevor listened to his wife's words without emotion. After 12 years of marriage, she was finally showing him who she really was. And he was about to show her the consequences of underestimating Trevor Hoffman. Chapter 7. The Network Titans. 3 days after the arrests, Trevor stood in his office overlooking the construction site that had been his life's work. But today, instead of watching his crew, he was meeting with a different kind of professional, Marcus Webb, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. Your instincts were correct, Marcus said, spreading documents across Trevor's desk. The Derek Voss identity theft scheme goes much deeper than what you initially found. Trevor studied the new evidence, bank statements, fake social security numbers, altered transcripts. Derek had been running a sophisticated operation that extended beyond just stealing from students. He's been targeting faculty members too, Marcus continued, using his access to university systems to create false identities based on professors' personal information. We're looking at over $750,000 in total theft. And Randall, Marcus pulled out another folder. Randall Martinez is essentially bankrupt. He owes $400,000 to various casinos. His house is in foreclosure, and he's been borrowing against the family trust fund. The interesting part is the timing. What do you mean? 3 months ago, Randall took out a $50,000 cash advance from a loan shark named Vincent Torino. Very nasty individual with connections to organized crime. The payment was due next week. Trevor leaned back in his chair. So killing me wasn't just about freeing my wife to be with Derek. It was about Randall getting access to her inheritance to pay off his gambling debts. Exactly. And there's more. Marcus pulled out surveillance photos. Derek Voss has been in contact with Vincent Torino as well. We think Derek was planning to use his share of your wife's inheritance to expand his identity theft operation, possibly with Torino's backing. The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clearer. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a carefully planned murder designed to solve multiple financial problems for multiple people. What about the twins? Trevor asked. Connor and Garrett are looking at attempted murder charges, but their lawyer is trying to argue they were manipulated by their father. Garrett seems genuinely remorseful, but Connor, Marcus shook his head. Connor is proud of what they did. He's been bragging to other inmates about taking care of family business. Trevor felt a cold satisfaction. Good. Let him brag. Juries hate defendants who show no remorse. His phone rang. Captain Morrison? Mr. Hoffman, we've had an interesting development. Derek Voss wants to make a deal. What kind of deal? He's offering to testify against your wife and her brother in exchange for a reduced sentence on the murder conspiracy charges. Says he has information about other crimes they were planning. Trevor considered this. Derek flipping on his co-conspirators could strengthen the prosecution's case, but it also meant the man who'd been sleeping with his wife might avoid the full consequences of his actions. What's he offering to reveal? Apparently, your murder was just the first step. They were planning to kill Derek after the insurance money came through, making it look like a suicide driven by guilt over your death. Your wife would have ended up with everything. The revelation hit Trevor like a physical blow. Even Derek, her supposed lover, was expendable in Bree's ultimate plan. She'd been willing to kill everyone who could connect her to Trevor's murder. Captain, I want you to know that I'll be pursuing civil action against all of them as well. Even if they end up in prison, I want to make sure they can never profit from this in any way. That's your right, Mr. Hoffman, though I doubt there will be much left to recover after legal fees and restitution. After ending the call, Trevor sat alone in his office, processing the full scope of his wife's betrayal. For 12 years, he believed he was building a life with someone who loved him. Instead, he'd been married to someone who saw him as an obstacle to be removed. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Hoffman, there's a woman here to see you. Says she's from the DA's office." "Send her in." Assistant District Attorney Lisa Payton entered with a briefcase and a determined expression. "Mr. Hoffman, I wanted to discuss your case personally. The evidence you've provided is extraordinary. I wanted to make sure there was no possibility of anyone escaping justice. Well, you succeeded. We're charging my wife with conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. Derek Voss is facing similar charges, plus the identity theft crimes. Randall Martinez and his sons are being charged with attempted murder and conspiracy. What are we looking at for sentences? With the evidence you've provided, your wife and Derek Voss are looking at life sentences without possibility of parole. Randall Martinez could get 25 to life. The twins, if convicted, are looking at 15 to 20 years each." Trevor nodded. "Good. These people thought they could murder me and walk away rich. I want them to spend the rest of their lives understanding how wrong they were. There's something else, Mr. Hoffman. The case has attracted significant media attention. The story of a man who outwitted his would-be killers and provided evidence to convict them is making national news. I don't want fame from this. I understand, but the publicity might serve a purpose. Other victims of similar schemes might come forward. Your wife and Derek weren't operating in isolation. They may have targeted other people as well. The thought that Bree might have done this before, might have other victims, added another layer to Trevor's anger. But it also reinforced his conviction that he'd done the right thing by ensuring their complete exposure and punishment. "Whatever helps make sure justice is served," he said finally. As the ADA left, Trevor returned to his window overlooking the construction site. His crew was making good progress, building something solid and permanent that would last for generations, unlike the people who tried to destroy him. Trevor built things that endured. Soon, he would testify at their trials, and the world would see exactly what Bree Martinez and her accomplices had tried to do. They would learn that Trevor Hoffman wasn't the weak, disposable man they'd thought he was. He was something much more dangerous, a man who never forgot, never forgave, and never lost. Chapter 8. The Trial of Betrayers. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters as Trevor made his way inside for the first day of testimony. 6 months had passed since the attempted murder, and the media attention had only intensified as details of the conspiracy emerged. The case had become a symbol of betrayal and justice that resonated far beyond their small city. Inside courtroom 3, Trevor took his seat in the witness stand and looked across at the defendant's table. Bree sat between two expensive lawyers, her professional demeanor intact, but her eyes hollow. Derek looked younger and more frightened than ever, the reality of life, imprisonment finally sinking in. Randall appeared defiant, while Connor maintained his cocky attitude. Only Garrett showed genuine remorse. "Mr. Hoffman," began ADA Payton, "please tell the court about your marriage to the defendant, Brianna Martinez. I met Bree 12 years ago when she was tutoring me for my GED. She was a psychology professor. I was a construction contractor, trying to better myself. She seemed to believe in me when no one else did. And when did you first suspect something was wrong in your marriage?" Trevor's voice remained steady as he detailed the changes in Bree's behavior. The secretive phone calls, the emotional distance that had grown between them. The jury leaned forward, drawn into the story of a man who'd sensed danger but had no idea how deep the betrayal went. "What did you do when you became suspicious?" "I installed monitoring software on my wife's phone. I know that sounds invasive, but I'd grown up in foster care. I learned early to recognize when someone was planning to hurt me." The defense lawyers objected to this admission, but the judge allowed it to stand. Trevor's childhood trauma provided context for his hypervigilance, making his actions seem reasonable rather than paranoid. "And what did you discover through this monitoring?" Trevor methodically presented the evidence. Text messages between Bree and Derek discussing his removal, communications with Randall about finding an isolated location, conversations about insurance policies and inheritance procedures. Each revelation drew audible gasps from the gallery. When Peyton played the recording of Bree saying, "Make sure he drowns," several jurors visibly recoiled. The woman they'd seen enter the courtroom as a respected professor was revealed as someone capable of ordering her husband's murder with casual cruelty. "Mr. Hoffman, why didn't you simply confront your wife or seek a divorce when you discovered her affair?" "Because I realized this wasn't just about an affair. They were planning to kill me. If I confronted them, they might have changed their method or accelerated their timeline. I needed evidence that would put them away forever. So you allowed the attempt on your life to proceed?" "I prepared for it. I knew the general location. I had escape routes planned, emergency supplies positioned, and backup monitoring my location. It was risky, but it was the only way to catch them in the act." The cross-examination by Bree's defense attorney was brutal but ineffective. The lawyer tried to portray Trevor as a controlling husband who'd driven his wife to desperation, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The recordings, the financial documents, the elaborate planning. It all painted a picture of cold-blooded premeditation. "Isn't it true, Mr. Hoffman, that you married above your social class and always resented your wife's superior education and family background?" Trevor's response was measured and devastating. "I married someone I thought loved me, despite our differences. What I discovered was that she saw me as an obstacle to be removed, not a husband to be cherished. The resentment wasn't mine, it was hers." Derek's testimony, given as part of his plea agreement, only made things worse for the other defendants. He detailed how Bree had initiated their relationship, how she'd proposed Trevor's murder, and how the plan had evolved to include killing Derek himself after the insurance money was secured. "She told me Trevor was holding her back from her potential," Derek testified, his voice barely audible. "She said he was beneath her intellectually and socially, and that removing him would be like cutting away dead weight." Bree's composure finally cracked at these words. She began crying, but the tears looked more like anger and self-pity than genuine remorse. Randall's defense was equally unsuccessful. His lawyer tried to argue that he'd been manipulated by his sister, but the evidence showed he'd been deeply involved in planning the murder from the beginning. Worse, the revelation of his gambling debts and connection to Vincent Torino made it clear he had his own financial motives. "Your Honor," Randall finally said, standing without his lawyer's permission, "I want to make a statement." "Mr. Martinez, I strongly advise," his attorney began. "No, I need to say this." Randall turned to face Trevor directly. "I underestimated you. We all did. We saw what we wanted to see. Some blue-collar guy who got lucky marrying into our family. We never saw the man who'd survived foster care, built a successful business, and was smart enough to turn our own plan against us." The courtroom was silent as Randall continued. "You want to know the truth? We deserve what happened to us. We planned to murder an innocent man for money, and we got exactly what we had coming." His lawyer looked horrified at this admission of guilt, but Randall seemed almost relieved to finally tell the truth. Connor, however, remained defiant. When called to testify in his own defense, he showed no remorse. "Uncle Trevor never belonged in our family. Everything we did was trying to fix a mistake that should never have happened." The jury's reaction to Connor's testimony was immediate and negative. Here was a young man who felt no shame about attempted murder, who saw Trevor as less than human simply because of his background. Garrett's testimony was different, tearful and genuine. He expressed deep remorse for his actions. "I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid to stand up to my father and brother. That's not an excuse. I should have been stronger. I should have warned Mr. Hoffman instead of helping them try to kill him." The closing arguments lasted 2 days. The defense lawyers tried various strategies: temporary insanity, family pressure, crimes of passion. But nothing could overcome the weight of evidence Trevor had provided. ADA Peyton's closing was devastating. The defendants didn't just plan to commit murder, they planned to profit from it. They saw Trevor Hoffman not as a human being with rights and dignity, but as an obstacle to their financial goals. They threw him into a raging river and told each other to make sure he drowns. Only Trevor's intelligence, preparation, and sheer will to survive prevented them from succeeding. The verdicts came back after just 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts for Bree, Derek, Randall, and Connor. Garrett was convicted of attempted murder, but with a recommendation for leniency due to his cooperation and remorse. As the sentences were read, life without parole for Bree and Derek, 25 to life for Randall, 20 years for Connor, and 15 years for Garrett, Trevor felt no satisfaction, only a grim sense of justice served. The woman he'd loved for 12 years would spend the rest of her life in prison. The family he'd tried so hard to belong to had tried to kill him for money. But he'd survived, and he'd made sure they faced the consequences of their choices. As he left the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, but Trevor walked past them without comment. He had nothing more to say to anyone about this chapter of his life. It was time to move forward and build something new. Chapter 9, Building from Ashes. 2 years after the trial, Trevor stood in the conference room of his expanded business, now called Hoffman and Associates Construction. The company had grown dramatically, partly due to the publicity from the case, but mostly because Trevor had channeled his anger and energy into building something bigger and better than before. The Morrison Community Center project is ahead of schedule and under budget, reported Sarah Kim, his new business partner and the architect who'd helped him design the company's expansion. The city council is so pleased, they want to discuss 3 more projects. Trevor nodded, reviewing the financial reports spread across the table. His business was now valued at over $5 million, and he employed 47 people. Success, it turned out, was the best revenge. What about the scholarship fund? He asked. The Trevor Hoffman Foundation for Foster Children has endowed its first 5 scholarships this year, Sarah continued. Full rides to vocational schools for kids aging out of the system. This had become Trevor's real passion, helping kids like himself who had no family support but possessed the determination to build better lives. The foundation used a portion of his business profits to provide not just scholarships, but mentoring, job placement, and ongoing support. His phone buzzed with a text from Miguel, who was now his general manager. Boss, you need to see the news. Bree Martinez died in prison yesterday. Trevor stared at the message for a long moment. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, no sense of closure. Bree had made her choices, and she'd lived and died with the consequences. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Captain Morrison entered, looking older but still sharp. Trevor, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. Of course not. What can I do for you? I wanted to tell you in person. Vincent Torino was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide, though there are some questions about that. Trevor raised an eyebrow. Torino had been convicted of running the loan sharking operation that had pressured Randall Martinez into desperate measures. His death meant that particular thread of the conspiracy was finally closed. Any connection to our case? Probably not directly. But word in the prison system was that he blamed your investigation for bringing down his operation. Your wife's case led us to him. And once we started looking, we found enough evidence to put him away for life. How are the others doing? Morrison consulted her notes. Derek Voss was found dead in his cell 6 months ago. Definite suicide. Couldn't handle the reality of life imprisonment, apparently. Randall Martinez is in solitary confinement after 3 separate attempts on his life. Seems his gambling debts made him enemies in prison, too. And the twins, Connor's been in and out of solitary for fighting, still thinks he's the victim in all this. Garrett, though, he's been a model prisoner. Earned his GED, taking college courses, working in the prison library. He writes to you sometimes, doesn't he? Trevor nodded. Every few months, Garrett sent a letter of apology and updates on his rehabilitation efforts. Trevor never responded, but he read them. Unlike the others, Garrett seemed genuinely committed to becoming a better person. After Morrison left, Trevor sat alone in his office, processing the news of Bree's death. The woman who'd shared his bed for 12 years, who'd planned his murder while smiling and cooking his breakfast, was gone. The chapter was truly closed now. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Hoffman, There's a young man here to see you. Says his name is David Chun, and he's from the foster care system. Send him in." A nervous 18-year-old entered, clutching a folder of papers. "Mr. Hoffman, I applied for one of your scholarships for the electrical training program at the technical college." Trevor studied the young man. Thin, poorly dressed, but with intelligent eyes and calloused hands that suggested he wasn't afraid of work. "Tell me about yourself, David." "I've been in the system since I was 6. Bounce around a lot, never got adopted. I age out next month, and I want to learn a trade. I want to build things, make something of myself." The earnestness in David's voice reminded Trevor of himself at that age, desperate to prove himself worthy, to build a life that mattered. "You know anything about construction?" "I worked summers with a contractor who took in foster kids. He taught me basic carpentry, some electrical work. Said I had good hands for it." David held up his calloused palms. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Hoffman. I just need a chance." Trevor smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in years. "David, not only are you getting the scholarship, but I'm offering you a part-time job while you're in school. You can work with our crews on weekends and summers. Learn the business from the ground up." The young man's eyes filled with tears. "Really? You do that for me?" "Someone needs to look out for kids like us," Trevor replied. "People who understand what it's like to have nothing and build everything from scratch." As David left with his scholarship papers and employment contract, Trevor realized something had fundamentally changed in him. The anger that had driven him for 2 years was finally fading, replaced by something more constructive: purpose. He'd started this journey as a man whose wife had tried to murder him. He'd ended it as someone who could help others build the kinds of lives that Bree and her accomplices had tried to steal from him. His phone rang. Sarah Kim calling from the construction site. "Trevor, you need to get down here. The community center's frame is up, and the mayor wants to do a photo op for the groundbreaking ceremony." "I'll be right there." Trevor gathered his hard hat and walked toward the door, pausing to look at a framed photo on his desk. Not of Bree or their wedding, but of his first construction crew, taken 15 years ago when he was just starting out. Those men had believed in him when he was nobody, just like he was believing in David Chun today. Outside, the sun was shining on another construction site, another project that would stand long after everyone involved was gone. Trevor had learned the most important lesson of his life. You can't control who betrays you, but you can control how you respond to that betrayal. Some people choose destruction. Trevor Hoffman had chosen to build. And in the end, that made all the difference.